Welcome to the Learning to Die podcast.
I'm Ian Dunican.
And I'm Ciaran O'Regan.
How do I live when I know I must die?
We explore areas of philosophy, psychology, martial arts, culture, existential risk, history, society, religion, science, and anything else that seems of interest and relevance to answering that question.
We can only hope that some of what we learn might be of benefit to you too. Namaste, sapiens. Welcome back to the Learning to Die podcast. Today I am joined by my co-host and good old friend there, Ciaran O'Regan, in the southern part of Ireland, in the nation's capital, the New Republic, Cork. And we also have Buddharakkhita joining us today from Sri Lanka, although originally from Tipperary. How are we today, gentlemen?
Yeah, good.
Brilliant. Looking forward to this.
Excellent. So we've all known each other through different ways. So Buddharakkhita and I were acquainted here in Perth in Western Australia. He moved into Sri Lanka as he is a Buddhist monk, which we'll talk about today. And he's recently been in Ireland and caught up with Ciaran as well. And they had some quarrelsome talk with Ciaran a couple of times. And now we've all decided to convene and sort out the world's problems here on this episode. We won't be talking about Joe Rogan on Spotify or Jordan Peterson or the upcoming war in Ukraine or how to solve COVID, unfortunately.
Or how to grow spuds in the advent of a Ukrainian-American war or a US war. So that's what becomes hard about nuclear war. Isn't necessarily if you're away from it. It's actually how to grow food afterwards becomes the hard part when the sky's all black.
Well, the problem we have now in the moment, I think, is most people have supply chain issues. It's not even about growing the food; it's about getting it to the person. So, which is a challenge with most things. But anyway, let's not digress. You can go down below. You can email Ciaran and ask him how to grow spuds if you wish.
Yeah.
He'll respond to you in his usual fashion in a 14-page essay. Buddharakkhita, it's great to have you on today. Thank you very much for making some time to have a chat to Ciaran and I. I suppose the first thing is it would be very good just for people who don't know you to give a kind of a brief overview of your journey, just in a very high level view for a few moments from growing up in Ireland to becoming a Buddhist monk, because it's not something you're into every day. And then obviously we'll pick into some of these areas as we go along today in the conversation.
Yeah, I suppose that's useful because it kind of sets the context of who I am. And again, a question or feedback I often get is, you're not what I expected of a Buddhist monk, and often I have to say, this is who I am. And so my background is I grew up on a farm in a very remote, village within Ireland. And I graduated, from high school and got into college, and I studied science and I did a PhD in physical chemistry. And then I was recruited out of college into the semiconductor industry. So I worked in computer chip manufacturing, which is, famous for its supply chain issues at the moment. And I was in that industry for about 8 years. And then in the parallel to my education and professional career, I had developed from a very young age an interest in meditation, like from about 12. Sort of a self-interest. And then when I got to college in Dublin, I was able to pursue martial arts. So we have a lot of background similarities. I was doing Aikido and all these Okinawan weapon systems and sword work and all of that kind of stuff. So, I was reading Gorin no Sho or the Book of Five Rings back in the 80s. And so we have a lot of mutual background. But then, when I was working in the semiconductor industry in Singapore and then subsequently in Malaysia. And one of the reasons I selected to work in Malaysia, I had opportunities to work in Silicon Valley and other places. But I chose Penang in Malaysia because of the meditation background. And professionally, I was doing quite well. I was what they call an integration engineer and a lead integration engineer and technical manager and all this kind of stuff. But what I realized was that the secret sauce was the meditation in the background, that I could juggle a lot of balls, I could handle a lot of pressure. And there's a lot of people in the semiconductor industry are real specialists, but I was a generalist, you know, and it's quite interesting when, like, if I'm trying to give people advice around, you know, career and life and stuff like that, like I'm often trying to figure out, are you a specialist or a generalist? And that affects later on, even in meditation, where people are into samatha, into concentration techniques, or they're into vipassana. So they can be kind of have, how to say, I'm interested to find out how their mind is working and how are they leaning? Do they lean towards specialization, concentration, or are they leaning towards a more open, general view of the world? So after a number of years of working, and I got to a point where my next promotion would have been over, you know, managing a lot of people, and I had an inkling in the back of my mind that I really didn't understand myself well, and I wasn't going to enjoy that experience as a manager, because I had seen a lot of my colleagues take promotion and really buckle. You know, they gave up doing what they enjoyed, and they got into doing what they hated, or they weren't good at, or, you know, they were not skillful at. And I decided I wasn't going to be one of those, you know, sad managers and, you know, the bane of other people's lives. And so I headed off to Burma. I took a career break, sabbatical, you could say, and I headed off to Burma. And, you know, I just kind of, how to say, I'm still on sabbatical. Whatever, 18 years later. Yeah, I didn't expect or intend to go down this rabbit hole, but it's a gift that keeps on giving, you know. So I have a deep curiosity, you know. I have a deep sense of wonder and awe in the world, and you know, I still enjoy the tech space. I still enjoy, you know, following. I'm a sort of a techno-utopian in some ways. And I hope for the prosperity and well-being of the world. And I hope technology has a good role to play in that. But, you know, at the same time, I see a tremendous dearth of leadership in the world. Like, people are out of ideas. And, you know, it does come back. I was actually listening to Ernest Becker today in honor of you guys as well. I have one of the podcasts I listen to, it's called Philosophize This, and he actually, last week's podcast was on Eric Becker, or Ernest Becker. And, you know, so I had sent you, I was kind of trolling you guys last night when I sent you that video clip from Afterlife. I don't know if you looked at it. But,
I did. I just watched that season last week, yeah.
Oh, you did? You saw the whole show? I didn't. I've only seen, I thought it was really, I did see the first season of Afterlife. We're talking about Afterlife on Netflix with Ricky Gervais, and you know, Ricky is a very famous atheist and out and loud about it. But I really thought he was in that very John Stuart Mill's way of giving his best argument against atheism in that clip, which was it was a clip of where he, as a reporter, goes to interview two children at a cancer ward, and one has shaved off her hair in support of her sister, and the sister, who has the cancer, by coincidence has the same name as his wife, who died from cancer. And so she asks, you know, where's your wife? And he answers, she's at home making tea, rather than saying that she was dead. And then as he walks out, he runs into another child, a little boy, and the little boy says, will you come back again? And he promises to come back until he gets better. But the little boy answers and says, or until I go to heaven. And Ricky Gervais is kind of stumped and says, then the little boy realizes that and says, do you believe in heaven? And Ricky Gervais says, definitely. And I thought my understanding of Afterlife is that this is it's actually a deep philosophical inquiry into death and how we deal with death and grief. And he's throwing out a lot of atheistic ideas, you know, that the meaning of life is to be good, you know, to be good, and just try to be good. And there is no real deep meaning. Just be good. And but it's really interesting that he threw out an argument that he couldn't defend, which I really say hats off to him. And, that he would give a white lie that the wife was dead, not say that the wife was dead and have to explain that she died of cancer and have to explain that to the child. Whereas the children were actually honest about their, their probabilities. They weren't fooling themselves, neither the girl nor the little boy. And, he really got to the heart of why, we'll just say that a deity or a God creature, a God, is such an attractive thing. And that, he actually points out really that in that like what Dawkins is so weak about, that, Dawkins says, everything is, I get fed up with all these rational atheists who say, it's logical that there is no God. Whereas, in fact, it's a stage of development for all of human beings to question what the meaning and, God and what's next and what are stars and where's the heavens. And they do this naturally as little children from, we'll say, 4 to 8 years of age, wonder and awe. And, Dawkins didn't realize that. I don't think he has children. And he doesn't realize that actually that's a natural state for people to move through. And so that's why I threw it out is actually from the Stuart Mill's side, that if you don't have a good argument for your, a counter argument, or you don't understand your opposition, then you don't really understand your own argument. So I know I've listened to a hell of a lot of hours of your podcast on death, and it can get into very heady spaces, but I was really impressed by that short clip. It presents one of the greatest arguments against your whole podcast series so far, from those children. And I was curious to troll you guys in this, just like how you all deal with that. Because I've run into this, by the way. I have experience.
I suppose for me, when we started this podcast, Ciaran and I, it was about, it was on the back of Ciaran and I having some interesting discussions over Zoom or via text or email, whatever. And we started exploring these ideas. And I would have said that coming into this line of inquiry, that my goal was to take on a subject that I was inherently fearful of, which was death. In order to explore it, to give myself a better quality of life, not to defy death, not to extend life, but to improve the quality of my life. So the first thing I'd say is, one is it's definitely improved my mood and my mental health since I've started doing this podcast, because I've explored more ideas, and I'm actually more, even on the days when I wake up with a sore leg, a bruised eye, a sniffle or whatever, I'm like, my 2 feet hit the ground, and I think to myself, fuck, I'm at it again. Here I go again. Like loads of days I think like that. Or when my wife goes away for a few days, I allow myself to miss her a bit more, and also then revel in the fact when she comes home and spend that time with her. So I'm enjoying things a lot more. I see a clarity to the world. I've improved my meditation. I've improved my inquiry about different stuff. And without going on ad nauseum about this for days and days, I would say that I'm actually probably back in the space of a 4 to 8-year-old at the moment in my life, in that awe. Because I have this crossover, like a Venn diagram between Buddhism, which I'm very attracted to, Stoicism, Taoism, and now the next one that's come in is Christianity principles and elements of Christianity. And I know, obviously, we were all raised as Catholics in Ireland, and it's very probably heavy and negative and domineering and punitive. But for me, the Christianity principles I've been bringing back in are more about the love, the nice side, the awe and wonder, these stories,
the pre-Roman side, basically.
The
pre-bureaucracy side of it.
The pre-institutional aspect of it.
Pre-institutional side.
And so for me at the moment, I'm in this kind of strange overlapping four circles of this Venn diagram where I'm sitting in the middle. And over the course of this podcast, I've gone from being probably there is no God to an actual fact. If I look at the inverse of that conversation, because I went the other way trying to nearly prove that in some way, I can't, and I can't prove the other. So I've come back to the other side, and I've embraced more of the non-materialism side of things, the looking at more synchronicity, to use Carl Jung stuff, where it comes in life. Why do strange things happen in my life? Why am I on this path? Why are we talking? Like, and I'm not saying there's a guy in the sky, you know, with a computer pointing out stuff and going, oh, download 2 bits there to Ciaran and move him over there to speak to this guy and blah, blah, blah. Maybe there is. I don't know. I don't know how it works. But I do definitely believe in a universal energy, nearly like panpsychism, where we're all sort of connected somehow, like somewhere like an Indra's net. But I would, I would be more back in the. I'm definitely not atheistic anymore. I don't even think I'm agnostic anymore. I think I'm more towards there is a God or an energy. What that is, I don't know. But I can tell you in this direction at this point in my life, it's been a really, the only word to describe it is a beautiful experience. It's been really nice. It's been comforting.
Yeah, definitely.
It's been very nice.
I think that clip again captures the power of the narrative around an afterlife and heaven, and this heavenly realm and so forth. Like, it's such a powerful sort of narrative and story, and we have very intuitive alignment with that idea, and it gets very natively picked up as children. You know, it's in the air, or it's even intuitive to us. You know, what about you, Ciaran?
Well, this might sound strange given a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, but without getting, there's so many different.
Don't tell me you're a Satanist. Don't tell me you're a Satanist.
Yeah, no, it's that like. It's that, like, and given all the podcasts that we've had, and I never really expressed this, and I happen to kind of be writing about it at the moment and make sense of it, but I won't go into the kind of, there's a whole discussion like semantics of what certain words mean, you know, but I think the way my mind has been processing the last few years in particular, particularly since that Bufo experience that I had a few years ago, but even before that, because of a few glimpses that I've had, fleeting glimpses in meditation of a dissolution of subject-object boundaries. There was like fleeting moments, glimpses that I had of a loss of a really pleasantly valenced loss of sense of self or object-subject differentiation. And then they were just, I didn't know how to make of it, how to integrate those kind of experiences. And then the Bufo experience kind of was just, it was still, I classify it, I still feel like when I mention it, I need to caveat that it's unbelievably serious business, and that it's not something to be dabbled in or meddled with nonchalantly. And it's really serious business, but that I'm at a stage where, even with Becker, for example, and I was actually sent that Philosophize this episode, but I haven't listened to it yet. But something that Becker mentions is actually a really useful anchor. 2 particular concepts that he repeatedly comes back to in the denial of death. One is, he refers to the life force, and that's kind of his use. Like, that word that's not his own term. Like, Tolstoy uses that phrase in some of his writings, the non-fiction writings. Like, and Tolstoy was this, as a Christian anarchist who rejected institutional bureaucracy, who rejected authority, and was all about imitating Christ in order to like, that was the way to be a Christian, was to imitate Christ, not to do what you're told by some bureaucracy. So he rejected he rejected all sorts. He was a full-on anarchist, but his potential was to actually try and live out. But the way he writes isn't necessarily based on, he writes almost like Nietzsche wrote, in an atheistic way, or totally, not even atheistic, anti-theist, totally anti-theist. Nietzsche referred to himself as the Antichrist. But Tolstoy was like a Christian version of Nietzsche's Übermenschen, that where Tolstoy was all about imitating Christ here and now, for life as it's happening right now. This is what's important, is what are your intentions in the world? How are you living in the world? How are you treating other people? And what are you doing in life? Whereas that was Nietzsche's thing as well, is like he rejected the notion of orientating towards something better after this, because then you lose what's happening at the moment. You lose what's happening in life right now. So he also rejected this. But I suppose that was a slight tangent. But if I was to rein it back in, from what I've gotten much more, what I've been trying to make a lot more sense of, is basically the rational and the irrational, and holding both in tension. And I've been getting increasing, particularly since the Bufo experience, because it's hard to think of anything more irrational than that. What the experience was, what happened, what the sensations were, the phenomenology of that experience was like, it's literally ineffable, but the realizations line up with philosophies that I was already aware with. Like the experience kind of enforced things I was already aware of. Like, for example, I've been for many years now, kind of, I suppose you call it, like, I think a no self philosopher, where it's very kind of like, whereas there isn't from a, basically this awareness that I have on an intellectual level, that there isn't really anywhere where there's a soul stored, like there's a fixed entity that is me, that moves across time. So there isn't anywhere. So everything, like Ian likes that phrase, everything flows, that kind of Heraclitus line of no man steps in the same river, etc. Because it's never the same river, never the same man. And that kind of the Buddhist 3 marks of existence are really impactful on me for a long time, as well as really interesting maxims. And because they not only manifest themselves in like a logical, rational way, where can we say a fixed self is that's permanent across time, and the fact that everything flows, it kind of reminds me of the Heraclitus line on the river and the man. But I suppose at the same time, so it's this awareness that this is still, there's this awareness that not only am I an agent that has a locus of suffering and a locus of responsibility at any moment in time, as moments in time continue to unfold, but I'm also an expression of, I like cosmic self-expression. I'm two things at the same time. Is this cosmic self-expression that's this temporarily assembled cluster of borrowed carbon that originated in a various supernova explosions or whatever, and now for whatever way, whether we think of it like panpsychism or consciousness emerges, whatever, it's like there's this cosmic self-expression on one side, that I'm inextricably interconnected with everything around me. I can't separate myself from any aspect of nature, where I'm totally dependent on, interdependent with everything, where what can I do without the oxygen produced by these plants and my carbon dioxide they're using in photosynthesis, and in a kind of a linear way, you bring it right back, where this conversation, I'm kind of like, when you follow that line of logic, then there's just determinism right back, where it's just things couldn't have happened any other way than they did, because to say that they could, not taking things into quantum randomness, but if the way things worked out is the way things worked out, because everything has influenced each other the whole way up. And if you look, is
that some sort of, I don't know, clever design going on? But I'm sorry, I'm not following you there. Or is it purely deterministic?
Like, so from a perspective of like, I didn't choose my parents, I didn't choose where I was born, I didn't choose who was around me, who their parents were, who influenced them. I didn't choose what books were in the house that I grew up in. I didn't choose who my teachers were. There's just all these things that were the formative things all along, shaped how I'm even trying to communicate this concept right now at this moment. And then that, if you trace that right back, this is where I suppose it gets somewhat pseudo, I don't know even what to call it. It's religious, not religious, but spiritual, like acknowledging the existence of what Becker uses this phrase throughout the Denial of Death, which is the causa sui, which is the cause of itself. So when you trace it right back, and to him, from my own reading of it, is like he keeps referring back to the kind of the causa sui, as into acknowledge the riddle of existence, the fact that existence exists at all. And at the opening of the Denial of Death is a quote by Spinoza. And Spinoza was the very early Enlightenment philosopher who had this concept of Deus sive natura, which means God or nature. So Spinoza's notion was that God isn't, and he really suffered for this. He suffered for this in terms of excommunication from his Jewish society. But to him, God wasn't some entity that exists outside of nature and judges you with some kind of a good boy, bad boy kind of a list.
Moral.
God was nature. Where whatever was the thing that could bring itself into existence from nothing. If God means anything, let's call that God, or let's also call it nature. It doesn't matter what way we come at it. Something brought itself into existence such that existence exists. And whatever that cause of itself was, let's call that God. Whereas he had three words for it. It was God, nature, substance. So he took the old Cartesian notion of substance and carried it a step further. So everything is made of substance. Well, where did substance came from? Well, there had to be substance that brought itself into existence from nothingness. What could bring itself into existence from nothingness? And whatever that was, let's call that God, or let's call that nature, which then made him somewhat, some people reckoned he was some form of a pantheist where everything is God. And other people thought of him as one of the first kind of atheist writers, because he's rejecting the notion of an external entity that operates outside of nature but interferes in nature volitionally. Rejected that notion. So, and to him, there was two ways of coming to know God. One was studying nature and coming to know nature and coming to understand nature using what we now call science, or also mathematics, coming to understand nature. And then the second way was to come to know your own mind. So to him, you can worship nature, you can come to understand God or nature in two ways. Come to understand your own mind, which is the mind expression of nature, or come to understand nature, God or nature, through studying how it works. But to him, when it comes physically, you're always studying nature after it's happened. So he called that like natura naturata, which is basically the past tense of studying nature after it's happened. But then there's also something that's potentially inaccessible to us, is what he called natura naturans, which is whatever the creative force is that's making it happen, isn't something that we potentially are ever going to get access to as from an understanding perspective. But we might be able to come to experience it, but we might not ever get to understand it. So that's I suppose that's I find those ideas extremely, there's kind of some mixture in there, just in terms of the riddle of existence. If you follow logic and rationality all the way back, you're still end up at the riddle of existence, which is what could bring itself into existence independent of any prior cause. And that's straight away, if God is to mean anything, then if the word is to mean anything at all, that seems like an adequate use of the term, if it's the thing that could create itself and it was like its own self-turning wheel that could make itself and expand itself. But whatever could kick the ball off of existence, basically. So,
well, I think this is a great this is a great thing, Ciaran, that you're talking about, because we've obviously spoken about Iain McGilchrist, who we both kind of fanboy on Iain McGilchrist at the moment, and you've obviously got his books there in the background, and mine are on the way. If they ever get here, I think they've been sold out every day. He restocks them. But Iain talks about this is about looking at the rational and the irrational in tandem. And I think to pick one or the other and just chase it back, you end up with the same problem. Whether it be on the irrational side, you're going to have to address the rational. If you go on the rational side, you'll have to address the irrational. So I think what you're saying is really interesting, because you're going to have to look at them nearly in tandem, that they both may be interdependent or interconnected, the physical world and this non-physical world that we can't describe, or we may never get to the answer. But we feel it in our heart, so to speak, or we see it in things that happen and the connections that we make and in the sort of experiences that we have, or the days where we feel like we're just like on that cloud nine experience. And it's hard to measure that. It's hard to objectify, put that in an objective realm, but we all feel it. We all know when we're kind of cruising, we're in this flow of want of a better word. So I think
but what is knowing?
Well,
what is knowing? I mean, it comes back to Ciaran's earlier comment about substance. So is there a physical substance and a mental substance?
In Spinoza's
whatever.
Yeah,
Ciaran.
I'm just when I was referencing.
Don't do a lit review, Ciaran.
Yeah. So if for me, like what I've, which is what draws me, like Ian mentioned earlier on, is this kind of notion of like the mental substance to me becomes the hard part. To Spinoza, it's basically two sides of the same coin. That like he was a monist, which is basically that there's and in that sense. But to me, even before I came across Spinoza, what I was fascinated with was consciousness itself and the hard problem of consciousness. But even around, because of the hard problem of consciousness, even trying to determine where it is that consciousness was to begin. So certain animals look like that they're having experiences similar to what humans experience. So then because I experience certain things and I can see other humans experience behavior or manifest behaviors that I can recognize in myself, I'm thinking, oh, they're conscious as well. And then these animals seem to, like puppies, seem to have experiences, and you keep going back the chain, and then eventually you reach a point where, okay, these birds, and then smaller and smaller birds, and then lizards, and then you keep going back and what is it like to be a bat? What is it like to be a lizard? What is it like to be? And you keep going down the chain of neurological complexity and neurological mass, and eventually it's like, well, how many neurons do we need to have an experience? What is it like to be a worm, let's say, or what is it like to be a bee or a wasp or a worm? And then you keep going down the chain. So where does consciousness begin? And it's this kind of line of questioning that gets me interested in like the likes of panpsychism, where but panpsychism mean a whole load of different flavors of it, but that consciousness or experience itself is imbibed throughout nature. Throughout, and I don't know whether that's throughout life or throughout matter, or whether it's just matter itself and life is just a different part. I don't know, but that's where there's both. I don't know. I'm not necessarily an idealist. I don't know if mind is first or mind is and matter are the one, or if things exist because of our experience of things. These are all I don't know, but I want to. Sorry, so you asked that question there, Buddharakkhita. What was your...
The question was, what is knowing?
What is it that is knowing? Because, we can look at the elements, the atomic, the periodic table, and we can look at that stuff that's formed in the stars, the neutron star bursts that you talked about. And it takes even more than that for some of the elements. So we have a fairly good handle of the material world, but the question really is there a mental world, or is there a mental phenomena? So again, some atheists would say that there is no mental phenomena, there's just the emergent properties of the neurons. And that, so this is a very materialistic, picture of the world. So there's a denial of, you could say, mentality, that we're just atoms interacting with each other right now, or we're some physical forces that are interacting with each other now. So like it's electromagnetic forces that are interacting between you and me at the moment, that there is no mind. There is no phenomena of mind. There's just only material properties happening.
When this sort of line of questioning gets asked, or when I try and do the mental gymnastics myself, I think it's interesting to what you've done. You've subdivided that question into two parts: the material or the matter, and then the kind of the non-material or non-matter, if you want to call it that, or some people call it rational, irrational. So when I divide that question out, I often think to myself, well, the rational stuff, or the knowledge, or what is knowing from a technical perspective, is only as good as our current methods for measuring or quantifying at the time. So 2,000 years ago, if you told people about, the way that the planets aligned, they thought everything, went around the Earth, and the Earth was the center of the universe. But then years later, we were able to, identify that, and science was able to get there through Descartes' kind of material, scientific methodology and quantifying stuff and so on. But even Descartes, his whole, he was the kind of the founder or the enabler of this whole scientific method. But he even says he was visited by God for this method. So how can the birth of such a rationalist, atheistic world was given by God, really?
But he himself thought he had a soul, like he had a mind-body duality where mind and body were separate. To him, humans were like machines. To him, they were kind of like meat suits that a soul would be put in and operate, and that was separate. So like to Descartes, it wasn't. It was like he viewed animals as machines, like toasters.
Yeah.
Like a dog is a toaster.
Yeah, like a simulation theory.
Yeah.
But
So
I think just coming back onto that, I think so knowing the non-material world is only as good as our current methods. That's the thing. But to know, I think, as an individual is highly individual to yourself. Only you know that you know. Only you feel what you feel.
Yeah, correct.
And so it's not up to me to know how someone feels about Christianity or Buddhism or, you know, any other, insert a religion or their relationship, because I might be in some brilliant relationship with a friend or a girlfriend or a wife, and that might be that to me, and another person could be in the same type of relationship with someone else, you know, married, but they could be completely different than I am. So it's very hard to quantify that as a group or across. It has to be highly individualistic, I think. So I think to know is very much reference point against your own experiences, and that is a limitation currently. But
well, it isn't a limitation.
It's a limitation compared to rationalism.
Like I'll tell you, no, it's really interesting. The enlightened monks would, when they would announce that they were enlightened to the Buddha, they didn't go up and say, I'm enlightened or I'm finished. They would say, I'm an individual, or this is an individual. In other words, the antithesis to that is I am superior, I am equal to, or we're all the same, or I'm inferior to. So like that process of this is an individual, or I am superior, we're all the same, or I am inferior is a mental operation. You know, it's not like one molecule of iron is looking at another saying, I'm better than you. You know, it's the mind that's operating, the substance. So, I mean, since you've invited me on as a Buddhist monk, we could go down the rabbit hole of all what the different philosophers have to slice and dice, but at least I can come out and try and sort of at least give the Buddhist philosophy on this. And it's quite interesting. You went back to Descartes and how Descartes and Cartesian and how it was, you know, he had such a great understanding of the world. But a lot of the mapping and mathematics and all of that that were subsequently, you know, coming from Descartes had already been derived in the East, you know, centuries beforehand. And I mean, if you can go to the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin, and there's a beautiful encyclopedia, you know, that would predate Descartes, and it has all of that information and more in it, you know. So a lot of it was just around the wrong view that was being held in the West, that put, you know, this heliocentric world and so on. And as you know, like the Greeks themselves, like going back, had different points of view or different philosophies that didn't develop, you know. So it's just the way it is. Like people get stuck into a groove. And I got stuck on chapter 3 of this book I was reading, which is Noise by Daniel Kahneman and I forget who else, not Chaz Sunstein, there's somebody else on it, a couple of other authors. And I got stuck on chapter 3 in it because he was talking about something that Ian is very interested in at the moment, which is on calibration and measurement. And he was talking about how you can just, instead of looking at the target from the front side, if you look at the target from the back side, you can see how the spread of the sample, you know, the spread of the target, the bullets hitting the target. If they're all around the same spot or the same area, you can say that they're self-correcting towards that spot. But is that spot the actual bullseye? You don't know if you're looking at the back of the target. It could be totally missing the bullseye. It could be missing the target. And a lot of that heliocentric idea was completely missing the target, and everybody agreed. You know, so we can all be in agreement and totally wrong. And I think that's something that we need to be kind of like that's something that I'm always aware of, because coming back to my bio, I've lived and worked in 11 countries. I mean, like I've spent extensive time, extreme exposure to different cultures, you know, cross-section from top to bottom, from left to right, you know, you name it. I've had the opportunity to experience it in some way. And as a monk, I get a huge cross-section of society. Like I tend to find, like people would say to me, oh, monks are not, you know, you don't know what the world is like, or you don't know what the life is like. But I would actually say it's the opposite. I'm more aware of the world now as a monk than I was when I was in the semiconductor industry. When I was in the semiconductor industry, I worked in a factory with 1,500 other people. And everybody in that factory knew a lot about, you know, the semiconductor chip industry, you know, even, you know, our secretary, our accountants, our lawyers, they all knew about semiconductors, you know, and you step out of that factory and nobody knows about it. You know, it was a very self-selecting group of people who understood and knew this one aspect of the world. And, you know, I find like as a monk, I'm forced into meeting a cross-section of society, rich, poor, and that's a great privilege. So I'm constantly moving out of bubbles. I'm constantly being exposed to different points of view. And you know, I find that diversity in thinking to be very enriching and challenging.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why it comes back to my earlier comment about this Afterlife little clip that I sent you. It was very on point of Ricky Gervais to present the John Stuart Mill's perfect counter argument. What do you say to the kids? And the answer was, he gave a white lie to the girl, and he you know, he lied to the boy. You know, he said there's definitely heaven, and his wife was at home making a cup of tea, when the reality was his wife was dead from cancer. And, you know, it scared the bejesus out of him to, you know, what was he going to say to that kid? That there is no heaven.
But here's the thing. Was the lie there to protect the child? This is what I got out of when I watched it. I actually thought the opposite. I thought the lie wasn't there to protect the kids. I thought the lie was there to protect himself, because he was so fragile from the loss of his wife that he couldn't bear to say it out loud in front of those kids. And I think the kids in their youth and their innocence was a juxtaposition to death and age. And I think he was protecting himself more than the kids, because it seemed to me that the kids were more at ease with it than he was. And you could see him fighting back the tears. So not only as a writer is he amazing, as a director and as an actor, to pull that all off is absolutely fascinating. That show.
But what about as a philosopher arguing his point?
Exactly. It's brilliant in every direction. So whatever stance you take on or whatever viewpoint you think he's doing, I think everything we're saying is different ways of looking at that scene. And I think I've been a fan of Ricky Gervais since he did The Office 20-something years ago. He's always been able to do that. You can watch those shows now and you can cringe at them and be embarrassed for people. You can laugh at him from his point of view, and you can be pissed off from the other person's point of view. You can put on that sort of avatar suit in any shape way you want to do it and play with it. It's absolutely brilliant. I think he's an absolute genius, whether you love him or hate him. You know, he's absolutely brilliant, and he really makes you think. And I think in some ways he probably is like an entertaining philosopher, because he is.
No, he's more than that. He's really like, he's a great philosopher, because that is the counter argument, the perfect counter argument to his thesis as an atheist. So, no, but I'm going to bring it up to, I'll move it forward into my life. You see, I've been in that situation, that Ricky Gervais situation of, like, I'll give you an example. I was in Dublin and I was staying at a Thai temple, and a lot of the supporters of that Thai temple were Thai. They were like husband and wife Thai, working in Thai restaurants in Ireland. Yeah. And their children were Dublin kids, right? I mean, they're ethnically or genetically Thai, but culturally Dublin. So they were growing up learning about the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, Jesus, Christmas, all of this kind of stuff. And their parents were having to figure all this stuff out because they had grown up in a culture, in a place like rural northeast Thailand, where they didn't have Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, or heaven, God, afterlife, into heaven, none of this, So the parents were having to kind of like white lie their whole way through and figure it out. And, I was like meeting both sides. I was meeting those children who were asking me about heaven and hell. Like, hell is highly unpopular these days. We can talk about heaven, but we can't talk about hell. That there might be angels, there might be beings, but there may not be negative beings, and all this kind of thing. And how arcane religion is, while at the same time, here's the children. And this cultural problem for Thai people, like, what do we say to our children? Because they don't believe any of this. They don't even know what the hell it is. Like, they don't know who or what the Tooth Fairy is. So they have to ask their colleagues and friends, can you explain the Tooth Fairy? What am I supposed to do? Because my kid is really excited that the Tooth Fairy is going to do something. What do I have to do, And so they're fully aware of the story and the narrative, but yet they're having to kind of white lie their kids because, what's their kids going to do? Because their kids desperately want to fit into Dublin society and their school, What are they going to tell their 8-year-old friends at home, at school, when their teeth fall out? You understand? It gets really personal.
Yeah.
How do you pop people's balloon?
Yeah.
To some degree, yes, it is. I mean, it's very dependent on the people. Like what's very interesting to me is that there are whole nations of people who don't even know about that lie, shall we say. They don't know about it. Doesn't exist. They never heard of the Tooth Fairy or Santa Claus, or all the other miracles. Never heard of it. That's very funny. That's an interesting story, But
it makes you think. Then some people take the position of like Sam Harris would take the position of, oh, it's never good to lie. You should never. No good comes from telling lies. But you've just articulated a great example there of, if you tell a kid from the day they were born, there's no Santa Claus, there's no Tooth Fairy, there's no Easter Bunny, you take away that magic, awe, and wonder. You go, right? No, you're not getting a story tonight. Fairy tales aren't real. I'm going to read you a passage from this chemistry manual because this is fact. And the kid's looking at you going, what? But everybody at school's learning about is getting stories about Hansel and Gretel or whatever it is, or the gingerbread men or whatever stories out there, Rapunzel.
There's a lot of good fairy stories or mythology coming from Asia. Aesop's fables are not Greek. They come from India. Yeah, and they predate the Greeks.
And as Johnny Dillon was on last week from the Folklore Society, he spoke about that as well. There's lots of crossover with folklore and tradition into Hinduism and other cultures as well. Yeah. And so I think you're right. I think, and Jordan Peterson speaks about this. Fiction can be more true than fact because there's a vehicle to explore these different elements. And so there can be more truth in fiction than there is actual lies. So that's where this irrational or we know this kind of gets back to the annoyance. This is a vehicle to do this. So I think this black and white thing of lies and truth is a very gray, like the yin and yang symbol, or kind of intertwines. And it, like everything, it depends. But it's an interesting thing to explore about. It's what you've articulated there is a nice way to kind of, it's something to chew on mentally about.
Yeah,
what's a lie and what's a justified lie and what's not.
We can go up and down the rabbit hole of 10 million philosophers and not come to any conclusion about like what is it that I think about and what's operating in my life. And that life unexplored is the life that's worth living, though. And what we just recently had one of the first Europeans to come and stay here in the last 2 years because of the quarantine situation, and it was interesting to have sort of almost like the first snowbuds of spring, having somebody show up again after 2 years quarantine. But it's interesting, the stories that we tell ourselves, and it's a very big aspect of mindfulness is learning to read our own mind, to see our own mind, so that we start to see the fabrication process that's happening. And that we understand that actually almost everything has been fabricated. And we're filling in a lot of the gaps. You know, we don't pay enough attention to the day-to-day, the details, so that we start to fill in. You know, we have the algorithm that's filling in, you know, the low density of information, and we craft a story for ourselves. So, you know, perception, detailed perception, and the actual perceptions that lead to the story and the narrative, who am I, is tremendous. You know, so like, for instance, I find it's very diluted when people say to me, we're all the same, bro. You know, we're not. We're completely different. No two people are the same. It is the most incredible denial of reality. You know, I even saw these like Siamese twins, twin sisters, and they're the most fused that I've ever seen. And they are completely different beings. They are completely different personalities. And even though they share this, you know, most of the same equipment.
Yeah.
You know, you know. So like this has been the privilege that I've had through Buddhist meditation. Like a lot of people think, oh, you know, just practice a bit of mindfulness to de-stress and, you know, chillax and improve the quality of life. And then all of these, you know, think positive programs and corporate mindfulness, like, which is basically, you know, a way of turning the workplace into some sort of hypervigilance, is just bonkers, you know. So I've had the privilege to have the time and the opportunity and to really learn meditation and mindfulness and other such techniques like concentration techniques with right view, you know, with skillful views that are in accord with the reality of the world. You know, like if those heliocentric astrologers or astronomers back in the day, you know, if they really looked at the data and
do you mean geocentric, like the sun goes around the earth rather?
Geocentric. Yes. Sorry. Like it took a Copernicus, like somebody who was just, you know, incredibly detailed measurements to say, look, the story, the narrative doesn't fit the data. And like coming back to a point you made earlier about the three signs of anicca, anatta, dukkha, of impermanence. Anatta is like freedom of self, like that there is no mini-me, there is no soul, there is no ultimate controller, it's just a process happening. And dukkha meaning a mental suffering arising. Two of those, like anicca and anatta, like the impermanence and process, are material qualities, but dukkha, suffering, is a mental quality. You know, we don't say that my bicycle is suffering or my car is suffering, but we do say I am suffering or this is suffering. So, but we do say that the car is subject to impermanence and that the car is just a process of car. You know, that there is no car, there is no traffic jam. You know, where is the traffic jam? Is it in the engine? Is it in the car tires? You know, is it in the traffic lights? Is it in the time of day? Where's the traffic jam? But there is traffic jam. You know what I mean? It's an emergent property of the system. But at the same time, there is suffering. There is suffering about the traffic jam, and that's a mental property. And these are phenomena. They're not just philosophical ideas. These are to be experienced and known in intimate moment by moment experience. And you'll find that different individuals are perceive more strongly one of those three qualities. So one person will perceive impermanence, you know, that everything is fleeting, passing away, and somebody else will perceive it as non-self in nature, like that there is no controller, there's no inner mini-me, or that there's a fundamental quality of suffering in everything. And again, I think the genius of Afterlife is this juxtaposition of hilariously funny with hilariously, tearfully sad. And Western viewers are not used to that. I mean, if you watch Asian movies, they love a sad ending. You know, a good honky movie always has a tragic ending where the boy and the girl, you know, tragically don't get together. Whereas the classic Hollywood ending is that they ride off into the sunset with perfect hair. And, you know, there's a tremendous poignancy in nostalgia. it's much more hooky than a good laugh. And to put those two together is just like really a winner of a show. And I think that's probably why it's been so successful. But at the same time, I really hats off to him as a philosopher, that he would actually put in, like, I haven't seen the show, but I did see some clips, and that's what was available on YouTube. And, he was constantly banging out his atheistic thesis. His arguments in the office with his work colleagues were all atheist arguments. That there is no crystals, there is no God. He would have that with the marketing girl. And but then, like, he didn't have that counter argument when he met the children. But I think at the same time, maybe he was just saying, this is it's kind of like, let's not be an asshole atheist about this. We can have a humanity. But coming back to Ian's earlier question is how about lying? And I would say it's a very slippery slope. Parents take too much liberty with necessary illusions, and so do governments, that there's a necessary illusion to be spun for the children, and it's a patronizing, and it assumes, like, it just gets into this whole spun out, between the reality and that people are willing to take responsibility. So, like, I think it's just laziness, and like in my own case, I have to be very on point with people around, because I am one of those people that do run into that situation with the children with the cancer, or the people dying, and the tragedy and the whole damn thing. Like, for instance, yeah, sorry.
So can I ask you a question just on the back of this, because it's a nice kind of segue into, we've been talking about the Ricky Gervais stuff as a kind of a center point to this.
Yeah.
I think first
it's just
of all,
a metaphor, actually.
Yeah, I think the other thing I think is I actually got a lot of people said to me from the last season of Afterlife season 3, which is now finished, that it wasn't as funny as other ones. I actually thought it was probably the most deep and meaningful. And I will actually say that I thought after watching it that Ricky Gervais mightn't be an atheist after all, now that he's in his 60s when I watched it. So I'd urge people to watch it and let me know what you think, because it was nearly like, he reminded me a bit like Nietzsche. He was in that maybe God is dead, but he was trying to be nearly like an Ubermensch. He was creating a set of values for himself that he was to live by. But in actual fact, the set of values seemed to be very Christian. That's something
I did see a video, an interview with him, like on morning TV. And he was just saying, like, having done the Afterlife show, that it made him think a little bit more about when he's doing a concert, that he's not just doing it for entertainment, but that in the 10,000 people attending his show, there are people, and you just don't know what they're going through.
Yeah.
And that willingness to open ourselves up in compassion, and that connectivity, that suffering is a universal, like coming back to our universals, that actually suffering is the universal that connects all beings together. Whether they're animals or whether they're humans, we can actually see that they're all suffering. We just had a monkey war around us here, with all the monkeys ripped into each other. And that wasn't pretty, let me tell you.
So what's the, some people listening to this might not be very au fait with Buddhism, and they might be thinking, oh, well, what do Buddhist people believe in? What do monks believe in? Is there a God in Buddhism? Is it like Christianity, where you have like a set of commandments or rules to live by? So what differs Buddhism, would say, than other religions? And do you believe in a heaven and hell? So what's the difference then within Buddhism, or what can we learn from it?
Yeah, like firstly, you have to realize that the Buddha wasn't a philosopher. Like, he wasn't somebody who was just some really clever guy who came up with a bunch of clever ideas and it all sounds very good. He was a person who was more like a scientist who had his own laboratory, except that most people, their laboratory is the external world, whereas in Buddhism, our laboratory is our own heart, our own mind. And the idea basically is like, if you understand the hair on your own head, you understand the hair on everybody else's head. If you understand your own heart, to some degree, you have a good idea about the hearts of other people. So I would often say, like in my own metaphor, we all play with the same deck of cards. It's just like, how is somebody going to play with those cards? Like what's their style? How's it going to play out? Some people get a good hand, some people get a bad hand. Coming back to it's lucky or unlucky. So how are they going to play? It comes down to skillfulness. So within Buddhism, there's a lot of emphasis put into skill, that you can ultimately, like what is translated into English as bhavana, as meditation, is to actually to cultivate or to grow. But in the 1800s, that didn't sound, too well. So, to cultivate or to grow our skills, we can cultivate and grow good qualities of heart, just as like maybe evil and wholesome people will develop and cultivate unskillful states of mind. And so the Buddha was trying to cultivate skillful states of mind with a goal towards what he was calling liberation or enlightenment. And that was a freedom from suffering. So he went, like, if you look at the plume of smoke coming from a fire, you can see from a great distance that cloud of smoke. And if you follow it back down to the root is the fire. So he wanted to quench a fire in his heart that was causing this smoke of suffering. So for most people, they run away from suffering. But as a Buddhist monk, I have to learn to train myself to actually be willing to go into my own suffering. So I had this German guy recently, and I could really feel that this was a guy who was a complete escapist, and he was keep running away from himself. And I said, like, look, you're here to face yourself and not run away. I mean, he did. He ran away within about 2 or 3 days, but that was his life. He had spent his whole life running away from himself, and whereas we've like drawn a line in the sand and said, okay, I'm going to stand and face myself. So. That's what the Buddha did, and he became self-enlightened, and then he talked about his own process later on. So like these teachings, like that, Ciaran mentioned, like about the 3 characteristics, these are not philosophical thoughts. These are extremely practical observations that that whatever experience you're having, you will see one of these 3 aspects, and if you see one, you'll see all 3. It's like like a coin. If you see one face of the coin, that there's another face of the coin. So that's really important, just to learn to train oneself to see that kind of nature, that universal quality in nature that's happening. And that's actually what becomes our object of meditation in the end, so that we're able to stay with that from eye open to eye close. And that becomes the nutriment for wisdom to arise. And ultimately, what we're really trying to cultivate is a path of wisdom. And like, that's why I feel very uncomfortable these days with the extremism, that everything is black and white and everything is just so, and everything is just this one thing. Whenever I hear that, I know it's a fanatic, because life is not black and white. And, coming back to your observation about Ricky Gervais becoming a kind of a Christian, I doubt it, but he's become a person who's much more nuanced and much more attuned to suffering and listening to it more carefully. I wouldn't say, and therefore more wise and older.
I wouldn't say he became a Christian, but I said what I would say is, just to clarify that comment, would be the values that he seemed to be espousing towards the end of the Afterlife episodes that he was kind of putting in place were aligned to Christian values. I wouldn't say he was a Christian. I think he was.
I don't know. I'd say he's just listening to suffering a little bit more carefully.
Potentially. Ciaran, this might be a great time for you to interject your question that we spoke about wokeism, actually, seeing as we touched up against it there. This might be a beautiful jumping off point onto this one.
But before I actually get to that, is actually an add-on to something that Buddharakkhita had said there, that kind of, I suppose it would help me. I realized that I kind of left a loop open earlier on when we were discussing our particular view, which is the reason I'm writing a lot at the moment about this very concept around what we talked earlier on about kind of atheism, and the reason I automatically jumped into the propositions is because I'm trying to write about it. So all these propositions are floating around in my head. But the reason the propositions interest me so much, like around Tolstoy and Nietzsche and these different phrases, or particular Spinoza has been particularly exciting at the moment in terms of certain concepts, is because they're some of the most useful signposts I've ever come across to point at experiences that I've had. So I'm trying to conceptually frame and wrap these experiences. So, for example, if I have to bring it back down to, since I referenced the Bufo one, is that the Bufo, on the other side of the worst experience of my life, upon paradoxically achieving absolute surrender in its totality, while within what I can't help but call a terror tunnel. That's if hell exists, or if hell means anything, whatever that was, the worst experience of my whole life. But then upon the achievement, paradoxically, of absolute totalistic surrender to whatever was going on, then it was like bursting out the other side. And it was the most meaningful, most important experience of my whole life, where there was absolute boundless love in every direction. It was basically the language I tried to use to try and get a grasp on the imagery is fractal geometric patterns made of love that went on forever in every direction, with no subject-object divide between me and it, and totalistic acceptance. And it was like getting a totalistic embrace of acceptance and love. And no sense, with no memory of having ever existed, no memory of what was going on, no memory of having just smoked toad venom out of a pipe, no concept of existence, no concept of I, just pure experience of infinite love was on the other side.
Yeah, but that would, it's very ironic, but what you've described as the ultimate experience of love as being, was that your sense of the most frightful thing?
No. That was on the other side of the most frightful thing. So upon total surrender to the most frightful thing, that was the worst. There was this, essentially, long story short, smoke the pipe. It feels like you start leaving the back of your head, because it feels like your eyes are closing, but it's not like going to sleep. It's like, it feels like you're kind of going out the back of your head is what the sensation is like. And, but then the next memory that I have from the experience is just chaos and mayhem and jagged, torn up, lightning like jagged, random swirling patterns with again, no first person coordinates to orient off, no sense of self or object, just the experience of dread, fear, terror, horror, all the bad words we can think of ramped up to maximum. But then there was just resistance. But then from somewhere, whether it was I had been told to meditate deeply on the word surrender and to embody what it's like to totally surrender as part of the preparation.
Yeah.
And then maybe it was this emergence of this word from the prep, or maybe it was one of the facilitators saying it from the outside, but there was no memory or whatever. But the word anyway managed to arise into conscious experience. And then upon managing to fully, totally surrender to this horrible, chaotic hell, then paradoxically, it was the surrender to hell burst out through the other side into the most loving embrace. It was like getting a hug from the cosmic. It was like returning to the cosmic womb, like getting a hug from the universe. That's what that was. The trying to use that kind of new age language to try. I have to use religious, spiritual language to try and. But then, so then trying to make sense of that. Like it was the most trying to point at it with words is and trying to F the ineffable, but I'm finding it really useful from like an integration process to try and talk about it and also to try and write about it and certain ideas, because if again, like I use the word, if like with Spinoza, if God is to mean anything, let's use it to describe the thing that could bring itself into existence from nothing. Okay. But if the word divine was to mean anything, it was this experience that I had of just absolute divinity. So then I can't help to use the word. It's like the old Greek word gnosis, not necessarily like Gnosticism, like Christian Gnosticism, but gnosis as in first person experiential encounter with divinity is what that word is like. It's non-transferable experiential knowledge that you can only gain from experience. So I suppose that was the kind of closing loop, I suppose, is all my propositional word soup that I'm trying to use as signposts are basically trying to point at this experience in particular. But the follow-on question, first of all, if you had any points on that, I'd be fascinated. But I suppose in relation to that was the fact that was an experience of no self. There was its experience.
No, it wasn't.
There.
It wasn't. That was an
this is what I wanted to ask you. Yeah. Yeah.
Because like to me, that would be the most terrifying experience, is that you go through hell and then you come out of heaven. Because again, to come back to this afterlife, there's this constant juxtaposition between Ricky Gervais, out of the depth of his love for his wife, he experienced the suffering. So when we experience love, that is actually the most terrifying thing. It's more terrifying than fear or loneliness, because and there's a lot of cases of this. Like, if you really want to torture somebody, you don't really, just whip them and beat them. You try to remind them of the thing that they most love, and take that away from them. That's how you really torture people. And for us, the highest state of mind to develop is equanimity. So, we can turn on a dime, like good feelings for people, like loving kindness or compassion or sympathetic joy. Like, these are considered like three very lofty, and these are all leaning into the other person in different aspects, leaning into their suffering, leaning into their nice qualities, or leaning into their skillful qualities. But the highest for us is actually equanimity, to that all beings will fare according to their karma. They will fare according to their actions. And, you reap as you sow. And that is an experience of like free falling through space. It isn't going into the Death Star of the sun or some black hole. It's absolute free falling. And it's in a mature way, it is the perfect solitude. It is perfect silence. It is perfect stillness. And like, that is a very subtle state of mind to achieve and to get into. Whereas like to get into a divine state is very attractive, and as you can see, it's been a state or an experience that you've hung on to very, very easily. It's very sticky and therefore very toxic, far more toxic than your frog toxic stuff. Is the toxic of that experience. I mean, look, we meet it all the time. People who have, had incredible experiences, and in meditation there are also incredible experiences, and you have to kind of say to people afterwards, well, you have to let go of all of that and move on. That is the surrender. The real surrender is that the scariest shit you'll ever meet is love. A very scary thing, and that everything you've ever loved, everything you're going to lose. Everything, and coming back to the topic of this podcast is living with death. Is that coming to that death process is that a complete surrender, that the people I love, everything I love, I have to let go of, and that takes a tremendous equanimity and equipoise of mind, and that we'll all meet in heaven afterwards. It's a lovely thought, but is not how the world actually operates,
But if I could, in reference to that point though, the reason it's I suppose hanging on to it is a good description is because it functions as an interesting turning point in terms of it was from loads of respect, without going into the event anymore, the after effect of it. So if I was to put it in perspective, this isn't an experience that I'm looking to go back to anytime soon. This was, it was like, it potentially very well was a one and done, never happen again. Like the single most meaningful thing that ever happened to me, but I have no plans to go back anytime soon. And it was years ago now, 3 years ago.
You mean chemically go back, but mentally you were going back all the time.
But that's it. But the idea of mentally going back is because there's lessons to learn from it. Like I was a different person coming out the back of it in a way that's tangible, where there's a feeling of out the back of it with this experience. Sorry to disrupt, just to finish this talk, is that this equanimity that you describe, there was this dual feeling. There was this feeling afterwards that I can still get back to sometimes, which was a sense of purpose to act in the world, but at the same time there was this how would you put it, contentment that everything is going to be okay regardless of what happens. There was like this, that was at the same time they were acting. There was a dual. Is that
really true?
Yeah, there was this, and it was like, it lasted for about 10 days to 2 weeks.
No, but maybe. Is it really true that everything is going to be okay? Bad things don't happen.
But it wasn't that bad things weren't going to happen. It was that the dual purpose was to act, but also to accept reality as like to that everything is like, it was kind of almost this alignment where there was only orientating toward what was in my control and a disregarding of what wasn't. So then it became such that the phenomenological state was like, I only oriented toward what was only worried about what was within my control and what wasn't. It became something that I can't influence this. So it was kind of like this alignment where there was just this orientation toward action that I could actually change or alter, which was my own intention, my own actions, how I approach other people, how I engage with other people, how I listen to other people, how I paid attention to my own mind, how I how I acted in relation to my conscience, how I orientated toward impulses to procrastinate, these kind of things that were just within my control, and living in this alignment where it was just this sense of contentment that everything will be okay, and what won't be isn't in my control. And there was like this calm orientation that's what and there was this, it wasn't just the one event, it was like the event was like the turning point, not a turning point, but a kind of an opening of a chapter or a spark. But then that only lasted a very short period of time, 10 minutes, half an hour, I'm not sure what duration, it was very short. But then the after effects gave me a new lens. It was like this orientation toward, for example, one of the things that I noticed during this period was I immediately became aware whenever I was interpreting social situations in terms of relationships of inferiority or superiority, whether I felt inferior than or superior to someone else. Immediately, I could be in traffic driving the car and see someone whose eyes looked like they were in pain or angry. And there was just this positively valenced outpouring of compassion for this person while they were driving in traffic, and I was just behind my own steering wheel, and I just noticed pain in people's eyes that I'd never noticed before. And it was this really, it made me open to suffering in other people in a way that I'd never noticed. It made me open to the future, open to certain parts of my own mind that felt like had been unlocked, not unlocked, but like the veil had been lifted. So it was like, the reason I go back to it is because I'm still integrating lessons that I learned through it that are functioning, that are still kind of life enhancing 2.5 years later, that's allowing me to make sense of it and make sense of the after effect and make sense of the aftermath and make sense of these totally, the visuals and the experiences, totally irrational, but to try and bridge this gap between the unexplainable and how to actually orient with these lessons, because and how I'm kind of gauging it is my level of I like the kind of tranquility, or there's a Stoic word ataraxia, which relates to this kind of state of tranquility, and maybe it's a similar kind of a translation or a similar description to this equanimity. So and I'm kind of, that's kind of almost like a North Star kind of, if the more kind of this calm contentment there is, and more openness to the future and openness to experience. I don't mean that in a technical way, like openness to experience, like, the psychometric analysis, but just an openness to existence. I'm using that as one of the indicators of how, of like where I'm at in a positive or negative way, I suppose. So that's why I refer back to it, because it's still, there's like these lessons to be drawn that have been life enhancing.
Yeah, but the problem is that that's just the narrator. The narrator now is going back to the thought or the memory about the past. Like it's a present moment thought about the past, and it's what you think happened and what you think you experienced. It's fabricated. So the direct experience of these three characteristics momentarily in a continuum is a totally different phenomena of developing wisdom. And the problem with these extreme, to be honest, I would describe them as kind of extreme mental experiences. Like we have them all the time in meditation, and is trying to steer people away from, like, that's just in the past. Focus on inputs that you're putting into the present moment, because they will have consequences again in the future. So thinking about the past is almost like a regret, is a regretful disposition of the mind. Like you find older people think about the past, younger people think about the future, and thinking about the future is a reflection of an anxious mind. You know, it's just like as a rule of thumb, you know, I'm kind of, as a rule of thumb, like that kind of approach. Oh, if somebody's constantly orientating and talking about the future, and I hope the future is going to be good, then they're kind of anxious in disposition. If they're talking about the past, they're kind of sort of regretful, or they're one is excitable, one is depressive, and like I find it very unuseful. It's not useful to talk about like in the self-talking way. Tell myself constant narratives about extreme or sort of unusual experiences, and because if you ever have these events again, if you ever take your frog thing again, it's likely that the mind will be conditioned or anchored, as you put it, to having that extreme experience again, and you won't actually move on and have other revelations and other insights. You know, you get stuck. And for me, the deeper and deeper experiences these days are actually quite mundane and subtle. Like they're not big bang. And like a lot of the time people will come to me and say, I had this experience or that experience. And I'm saying to them, well, are you kinder to your children? You know, do you find yourself more generous? Do you find yourself more sympathetic? Do you find that the world is more nuanced or colored than black and white? And, you know, that's to me a sign of somebody growing in wisdom. You know, coming back to what I was saying about Ricky Gervais, my impression was he was more nuanced. He's a person whom I would have said in the past wanted desperately to be an entertainer. He wanted people to laugh, ha, 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 ha. You know, whereas now he's realizing there's more to it being a good show than just simply entertainment. It's like connection, an interconnection between ourselves and other people. And that connectivity. And like these days, there's the desperate lack of connection between people and authentic relationality going on because people are not in connection with themselves. You know, that's the fundamental building block, is my own relationship with myself. Like that was the insight I had as a manager, that I wasn't going to enjoy the experience of managing lots and lots of people because I was disconnected from myself. You know, and I would be angry with myself and angry with other people or something like that. And I didn't want to be there in that. I had enough insight to kind of say, okay, I need to do my work on this, you know. And this comes back to the woke question that Ian wanted to ask about, which is like, I just find categories are not a useful way of looking at the world, you know, and simple schema of like, you are white, and so therefore you're like this, you're male, you're therefore like this. Like that's such a clunky way of, it lacks nuance, it lacks like I'm a connoisseur of humanity and my own humanity. And I realize that it's very complex. You know, one day I'm annoyed with somebody and one day I'm not. I love the person, whatever. And you know, has that got something to do with a category? I don't know. It's just usually to do with my own, what side of the bed I got out of, or am I hungry or something, you know, more than some category. And, you know, like I said, I just find like my own universal truth at this stage is we're all playing with the same deck of cards. And when I say to the same deck of cards, I'm talking about mental states, not like some external categories that we don't have much control over, like whether you're tall or small, or whether you're fat or thin, or, you know, light or dark. You know, it's not looking at the heart. You know, one of my emails is knowtheheart@gmail.com. You know, so that's what is important to me, is know the heart. And when you look at the heart of most, you know, of the person that you're in relationship with, the person who's in front of you right now, like that isn't these categories that are being thrown around these days as the way to handle the world, the way to deal with other people. And, you know, I find that such oversimplification of the experience of another person is really immature. You know, it's really denigrating or You know, I just find it so poor, so abjectly impoverished. It's an impoverishing experience to look at the world through that lens. And, you know, and I do find that the people who are propelling these ideas are just a very small vocal minority. And I don't have much comfort around those people because I find them very antagonistic, very immature, whereas I prefer to be around people who are much more nuanced, thoughtful, considerate, you know, connected with their own experience, their own momentary experiences. They're not dealing with somebody as an ideological, symbolic, intellectual object to be objectified and categorized. You know, that's, you know, I'm sorry, I just can't even be around such a kind of person, because I'm just like, oh, this isn't going to be good. You know, this is totally uncomfortable. This isn't a safe space. And it's such an ironic thing. You know, the Buddha means woke. You know, the Buddha is the enlightened one. It doesn't mean enlightened. Buddha is to be awakened, the awakened one. You know, he is the ultimate woke, but it's a very different wokeness to this woke stuff at the moment. Quite it was ironic, and it came out of the Black community as ironic.
I find it really interesting some of the stuff you've said there, because it's about, you know, working on yourself, trying to be a good person. I just find lots of crossover there when I'm listening to when you're speaking. It's so many similar messages that Jordan Peterson is espousing over the years about, you know, don't go out and try and save the world when you can't even clean up your room. Or some of those people that were caught in the January 6th thing last year were living in their parents' or their mother's basement or something. It's like, oh my God, man, like you really have not got your shit together and you're out there running around in a buffalo suit, or you're screaming at someone, or like what Peterson says, you know, about, you know, you're on a Harvard campus or Yale, and you're screaming about being oppressed while you're going to an Ivy League school. You know, and Ciaran and I have discussed this as well, and it's actually something I was thinking about today because I was listening to some talks with God Sad, and this whole postmodernist thing about rip down everything. I'm like, I'm really fearful, because what's going to be left? Like, if you tear everything down, do the woke people and the postmodernists know what's going to be left, or what they envisage the world to be? Because I think it'll be like Planet of the Apes out there. I don't want to live in that. It really makes me fearful of this.
Tear down, it's whoever ends up being the best at violence becomes the new warlord in whatever local area you're in.
Well, and Ciaran, if that's the case, and we've all done martial arts at different levels, if that's the case, we know with experience in that none of us are going to last long. But I can tell you one thing, is that the people with their hair dyed and they're running around screaming in people's faces. If you look up in social justice warrior videos and you look at those people, they ain't going to last 2 seconds. If I last 2 days, they ain't lasting 2 seconds. They're going to get absolutely fucking dragged to the ground and done. Like, I just don't understand what they think's going to happen. People aren't going to respect them in a like all these kind of societal norms that we have that have come out of, you know, the bad world. If they all come down, well, then it is going to be like chimpanzees. Buddharakkhita, you said about the monkey. You said about, to be honest,
I just think like I'm very hopeful actually about the whole thing. Like, I just sort of view it as a kind of a growing up phase, and it's a growing up phase that's happening on steroids, very, very fast, where people are becoming much more judicious and nuanced about media and their information, and they're having to learn to if I look at my own generation, who, you know, would be the X generation mob, like I remember them just saying, oh, I'll just Wikipedia that, or I'll just Google that. Whereas if I talk to younger people, like we'll just say younger than 20, they're much, much more sophisticated in their ability to think about things and what they're listening to. Like, you can never be presumptuous about what they're listening to. Like, they're listening to Spotify, they could be listening to Joe Rogan, or they could be like, there's a daughter of a friend of mine, and like, you know, I was just sharing music lists with her, all 60s and 70s music. So, you know, that was 70 years before her birth. Would that be 70 years? No. It would be at least 50 years before. Yeah, 40 years before her birth. So she's into what she calls old music. and very, very rich, very refined, very like wonderful, like taste in old music, as she calls it, you know, likes her rock and roll, you know, really, you know, likes Pink Floyd, likes like lots of things, like, and in detail, like not just trivially, you know, really, really enjoys it. Which, like, and her brother he's like so into jazz. Like, and I was just so jealous. Like, I was thinking, my God, you know, I was in my late 20s when I could afford to buy the CDs that this guy was just listening to on pop, or, you know, again, you could just send him a list and he's going to listen to it and get back to me on it, you know? So I find that with regards to, like, again, I was looking at an essay that this girl, she was only 17, she was writing as a, like, on, she was writing on philosophers from the 1950s, you know, this kind of feminist, this kind of woke stuff. And Margaret Atwood, you know, this diastopic idea about the power dynamic between male and female and all this kind of stuff. But she was actually, she wasn't bought into it. She was actually really understanding that this is just a story. You know, and I thought that was very liberating, and I thought that's very nuanced. And like, I just feel that the fundamentals in this whole woke stuff is so brittle and so shallow and so like, I think Ricky Gervais even like had a lot of good slag offs at it. Like, he had that one. Remember the plumber who was called Denise and thought he was identifying as a 7-year-old girl. Like, that was hilarious. Have you seen it?
Yeah. I think it's in
like,
season
it was,
one of
it was the biggest slag off of.
Yeah.
It was just the biggest slag off of that whole identity. Like, so if you can so easily laugh at it, then you're probably wise to that whole stuff. And like, that was brilliant, just brilliant.
Yeah, you know? I think it was in season
Demolished.
1, and I don't know if you've seen this, Ciaran, but he actually, it's one of the actors that was in Phoenix Nights. If you've seen Phoenix Nights back in late 1990s and early 2000s, Peter Kay had this band in the pub, and the guy who actually played the drums in Phoenix Nights was the actor. He played this guy. He'd be easily like 50 years of age, and he's short and overweight. And so for him to be dressed up like this as well was just, it was completely absurd. Like, it was, I'm laughing even just thinking about it, because I'm really crying, because it's absolutely so absurd. But we hear about stories about men in America with a beard and 6'2" and, you know, work as a trucker, and they're putting on a dress and going into like the toilet and say that they identify as a woman. Like, so it just actually kind of, he compressed all that into one scene, and he's sitting on the couch looking at him going, oh, all right. And he's just taking notes as if like, oh, what the fuck? Like, you know, and it's just, it's brilliant. Like, I'd urge anybody, I think Buddharakkhita hit the nail on the head, like, about this Afterlife show. It's got so many good things in it and humor, so it's enjoyable.
And I haven't even seen it.
It's brilliant. Like,
on YouTube.
It's brilliant. So when it came out like last week, we actually, the episodes are in like 25 minutes long. So we watched the 6 episodes in a row, like in 2.5 hours, just one after the other. We loved it. And we've watched the first 2 seasons 3 or 4 times. It's multi-layered and multi-level. As you said, like, it's philosophy, it's comedy, it's life, it's all sorts in there. Like, you can choose your own adventure every time you watch it. But that scene with the plumber as a girl, it's just, he's got a couple in the latest season as well like that. But
you know, in that case, like, the daughter comes in and opens the door, and she just turns around and fobs him off. But like, that to me is this, you know, young generation of under 20. They see through that bullshit. They're just trying to get through their O levels and A levels. You know what I mean? They know what they have to repeat. And like, I appreciate, like, say, Russians, like, there was a Russian, maybe even Nobel Prize winner, was like being very cautionary. You know, there's lots of people who are worried about it, but I do think laughter is the best medicine around that. And we're just growing up. Like, it's such a unique time. Like you live in what I call high technology places, but I've lived in very low tech places. Like, in Burma, I was living 5 years in Burma. We went from nobody had a phone, like, not even a landline, nothing, like, no landline in the village kind of level, to everybody had a mobile phone. And I mean, like like a Samsung, and everybody, you know, and it's all this like tut stuff like, oh, Facebook is ruining the Myanmar people and it's driving all the Rohingya and all this kind of stuff. There was a whole lot. Everybody was just suddenly discovering the world in Myanmar. It was like such an awe. Or I was at home this December, and I was showing my mum how to use a smartphone, and it was just like she would be giggling at like, wow, this is magic, you know. And I think it was Arthur C. Clarke or something like that was saying, like, you know, when technology can get to a point where it's like magic, you know, you can understand the naivete or but it is like, I sit here, I'm sitting in a forest talking to you on Zoom. I can, you know, use my phone to read publications, you know, faster than I would have when I was doing my PhD. You know, I don't need to go to the library anymore. The library's in my pocket. So like, I'm really hopeful. Like, I'm dyslexic. I don't read books anymore. I just play them. I get them on audio, or they're free on YouTube or something like that. Like you were talking about Tolstoy, the Confession earlier on. I listened to it on YouTube, you know, I listened to it. It took 1 hour. It was read out, lovely, perfect. And I have more comprehension because I'm not putting the time and effort into reading anymore. And I look forward to the day where people don't learn to read, they don't learn to write. Who cares? You know, your device is just mediating all of that. I mean, there's other things that like humans are better at. And in that sense, I come back to what I mentioned earlier on. I am a bit of a techno, you know, utopian in some ways. And you know, I see that the Buddhist teachings fit into this modern world, you know, and this like, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I had to go around, you know, telling a big fat lie about bloody Santa. You know what I mean? That I had to be upholding the Santa story and the Tooth Fairy, because that would be like too much. I couldn't do it. You know, I would choke on my own BS. You know, and that is to be woke. You know, where you're woke to your own BS and you can't, you just choke on it automatically.
I think you hit a couple of interesting things there about like how we're growing up and how the world has changed. So
yeah,
you know, like I'm in my 44 this year, and I even say, you know, from the encyclopedias at your home to having the internet is unbelievable. Yeah. And I think, you know, once I get frustrated too sometimes with the internet and what's going on and the woke culture, without the internet, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. Obviously, with this more technology, but more so, I wouldn't have attained the level of education I did, because I studied my undergrad and 2 masters online by distance. It would have been extremely difficult for me to do that via, you know, books and so on. I know people have done it before, but
what about our friendship? You've never met Ciaran
exactly.
in the flesh. I've listened to probably more than 200 hours of your stuff, Ian. You know, and we have a dialogue even if we're not speaking, like through the podcast, through YouTube, or now face to face on Zoom. Like, so I'm hopeful. Like, to be honest, like I still, you know, there is good in people and there's evil, and I hope we have self-correction. So like my attitude is I don't have a plan, but I do have self-correction, you know?
Yeah, I think that's very important not to have that, isn't it? Self-correction. You know, that to me is so advanced, because sometimes we double down on things and we don't self-correct, or we don't say, oh, I got that wrong. And when people do that and go, oh, actually, I was wrong about what I said, I get an enormous amount of respect. I give an enormous amount of respect for somebody to do that. But people view it as if like they're going to be disrespected for it. I think it's so admirable for people to self-correct. I wish I could do it more.
I think it's the playfulness, and I coming back to that whole Denise joke. It was so playful. It was such. I bet they had the best laugh.
I gotta find that clip. I gotta find that clip and put it in the show. Yeah, you're right. I reckon they pissed their pants laughing. Yeah,
they did, and it was just playful. And this is so ridiculous. And like, to be honest, that's if you take them seriously, you've lost the battle, because you're taking on a premise that there is something in there, and there isn't. And okay, I mean, maybe we can come back and have that what is the philosophical underpinnings that are so shallow and weak and what they're doing. From my point of view, it's the black and white nature, this kind of pandering, oh, it's just simple, and it's not. And categories like these really clunky categories, and it's bizarre. It gets so bizarre. You know, I was looking recently, there was a YouTube, not YouTube, but it was a BBC article about a girl who was, herself and her brother were orphaned, and they were adopted by, they were Sri Lankan, a boy and a girl in the 90s, adopted by a family in Coleraine or Castle Island, or what's it called, Cole Island, up in Tyrone. And they were raised in the 90s. So this girl would be in her late 20s or something now. And she was talking about the lack of diversity in Coleraine or Castle, this Cole Island growing up. And I was thinking, like, you know, it's kind of where I live here in Sri Lanka. You see, I am the only white person maybe within 100 kilometers, you know, pretty much. And it's okay. What's wrong with that? You know, this is a Sri Lankan community, a Sri Lankan place, a rural place. You know, I like the diversity of their beliefs, their culture, their life, their food, everything. You know, it's great. You know, I don't need us to be all grey goo.
Yeah, but the big, so I don't disagree at all with your, with the way when you pointed out that young people are seeing through it. But I think what concerns me about the woke stuff is that the people who are running institutions, if they are seeing through it, very few of them are not choosing to bend the knee and pander to it, because they don't want to be, they're afraid of social media mobbings by a very vocal, tightly organized, or they can kind of seeming like emergent organization to go and mob someone, or to appeal to some university to get someone fired, or thousands of people can organize to send a letter to some company to get someone fired because they claimed to, I don't know, do something like criticize affirmative action or whatever, or they made some kind of a joke somewhere. So it's like the institutional capture component is the part that concerns me. Not necessarily that the young people coming through don't see through the bullshit. It's the fact that, like, for example, you mentioned that Russian, the Russian physics. The reason I wanted to actually read this quote, Anna Krylov is her name, and she wrote this piece called "The Peril of Politicizing Science" for the Journal of Physical Chemistry Letters. And this paragraph that she wrote was actually it was the first of 3 pieces that came out by her recently. One was this summer, and then 2 other pieces recently. One of them was about basically the Royal Society of Chemistry, but I'll read you the first one. And she said, the answer, this is from the letter, the open letter, The Peril of Politicizing Science. And this is Professor Anna Krylov of the University of Southern California, professor of physical chemistry. She said, the answer is simple. Our future is at stake. As a community, we face an important choice. We can succumb to extreme left ideology and spend the rest of our lives ghost chasing and witch hunting, rewriting history, politicizing science, redefining elements of language, and turning STEM education into a farce. Or we can uphold a key principle of democratic society, the free and uncensored exchange of ideas, and continue our core mission, the pursuit of truth, focusing attention on solving real important problems of humankind. That's the first quote. And then there's another one where she said, so I'll read you the little paragraph before to give it a little bit of context, but she said, so this first paragraph is me writing. A recent example of institutional suppression of science for political reasons was described by Anna Krylov and colleagues in a paper called Royal Society of Chemistry Provides Guidelines for Censorship to its Editors. The authors quote from the new editorial guidelines, this is from the Royal Society of Chemistry in the UK, which seem to give primacy to the avoidance of offensiveness. Quote, the aim of this guidance is to help you to identify and prevent the publication of inappropriate content in our journals and books, and to encourage you to reflect on how inappropriate content can impact members of the community and readers around the world. Words, depictions, and imagery have the potential to cause offense. Therefore, we need to consider how content might be perceived by others. There can be a disparity between the intention of an author and how their content might be received. it is the perception of the recipient that determines offense, regardless of author intent. This highlights the need for scrutiny and awareness at all stages, from content creation to publication. Close quote. That's from the Royal Society of Chemistry editorial guidelines, prioritizing. It's bananas, like.
Yeah,
that's what concerns me.
What's particularly bananas is that I own what you feel about what I've just said to you. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, really, that's where looking at like real mindfulness is really helpful. Like, of where, okay, somebody says something and I don't like it. Like, to me, that's actually a trigger to pay attention, and like it's pointing out something that I can really learn from. It's something that I'm holding on to, and it becomes super informative to me. And I mean, coming back to our friends Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson, like Jordan has like resigned from this University of Toronto because he can afford it. He's independent, and this comes back to a conversation we've had, Ciaran. Without financial independence, you're he who pays the fiddler calls the tune. And like, I would also say, like, not just has media kind of run its course at, getting the eyeballs and attention of people, but I would say scientific journals are under severe threat. That whole model of like people producing scientific work and then for free writing it, it's published, and then the publishers benefit from that through automatic subscriptions to university libraries. Like, that whole system is probably crumbling too. And like, I mean, really, is that how science has to go forward, through these journals, through these institutions? If they don't cop on and wake up and change and adapt with the times, adapt with the multiple modes of information. Like, there's a lot of programmers out there who have never gone to college, maybe never even finished school because they could program. One of these kids I know, he's only 12. He can program. He can, that guy never needs to go to college. Tell his parents save their money, and if he goes to college, just go there for a collegial experience. But he's not going to be taught anything by any programming lecturer about anything. He knows how to do it already at 10 or 12. Like, he knew how to program at 8. And he has that mind. He has that way of approaching the world. And good luck to him. He's just lucky in this time and date and place that kind of talent is useful. But like, that whole structure is breaking down, and so is the academy itself is also breaking down, where people are not willing to spend $250,000 to get a certification and then spend the rest of their life paying back the loans around that. Like, really, I mean, I tell people, like, I mean, I get these Sri Lankan parents in here who scrimp and save to send their kids to the UK for a 3 or 4 year arts degree, and they come out like, just politicized or something like that. And it's really like a travesty, an incredible waste of their parents' money and resources. And so that they can learn to become an activist or something like that. It's ridiculous. Like I see the personal sacrifice that their parents have put into saving that money. It's a horrific amount of money. It's insane. And I don't know, I think the best courses I've ever taken were online, and they were free again. Like, free in the sense that I could have paid for the qualification, but I was actually just interested in the knowledge and the learning. A lot of the top colleges are available online, and you can just sit and watch them. The best courses. If I want to know anything these days, I'll just go and find the lecturers online teaching that subject. I wanted to know about history and politics. Yale had it all online. And it might be the center of woke stuff, but they have fabulous lecturers, and it was really interesting. I learned a lot from them.
I think you're dead right. It's completely like lower the water table and let knowledge and information be out there. And I think what's bad about what's happening with mainstream media and the craziness online, it's also allowing the good to arise, which is the ability to choose your own adventure and get anything you want out there. And there's no barriers to entry anymore. Like you said, I saw it in Mozambique and South Africa 10 years ago. Yeah. People were walking around with this elaborate system of doing credits on phones. There was no infrastructure in place. People were living in huts, and everybody had an iPhone.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is fucking bananas. But it's brilliant because in that iPhone, they can record a video on YouTube. Their access to that technology is there. They can watch a lecture on any subject they want. They can educate themselves. There is no, there's no real excuse, and there's all difference of levels of entry in as well. And I think you can completely explore and go where your heart's desire. Before Ciaran and I started this podcast, I was contemplating potentially going back to study philosophy part-time. And I was like, why am I just going back collecting more tickets? Like, it's like in a forklift ticket. Why don't I go on a fun ride of exploration? Because when I spoke to a philosopher lecturer, it's called a philosopher lecturer, I said, where's the best place to start with philosophy? And he said, wherever you find interest. And that's really was the first trade. So why sit there for 4 years learning about elements of philosophy you got no interest in, when we can explore it here in action in real time? We get off this podcast, we read lots of stuff, I'm constantly buying books. I'm reading stuff on the internet, I'm listening to lectures. My mind is exploring I'm getting into all these rich places. It's like going through universe into universe into universe of new ideas. And it's somewhat exhausting and nearly panic and anxiety inducing, but it's fucking brilliant as well. Every day is brilliant. There's so many things to learn.
Like I said, for coming back to neurodiversity again, I found my mode isn't that mode of going to the university and learning, here's the 10 of this and the 4 of that. Like, I can do it, but the price is tremendous. Like, I much prefer to listen to audible books rather than reading. Okay, if it's something I really want to study, I'll also get the book and I'll make notes and I'll listen to it. I'll do, I'll tackle it every which way. But I just feel like that whole system is being disrupted, and you ain't seen nothing yet. Like, the next 10 years are just going to, the last 2 years have I'm sure amped up this online, from our point of view of teaching as monks, we're reaching more people in the last 2 years than we did in the years prior, because this really forced us to have a bit of a kit and a setup, and to pay attention to our Wi-Fi connection, and as a result of that, the reach of this monastery has incredibly increased. So when people say to us, well, aren't you all bloody useless? No, we have a huge reach. We it's just been amazing. We are going all over the world: New Zealand, West Australia, East Australia, Canada, East, West Coast, America, East, West Coast, UK, even Europe, and all the time, 7 days a week, it's going on here. We have stuff going on here in the morning and night time. The afternoon, ironically, was a good time for me, because it's free here. But tonight, the abbot here is involved in a UN discussion from this desk, from the same place I'm sitting now. That wouldn't have, it's just forced everything to work out differently. And, I just see this rapid change, globally happening. In trade, you can say globalization, but I don't know how you want to describe it in terms of ideas, communication, and there's, the ability to work from home, or I see this world becoming a bit more like caste system, where if you're in a certain knowledge caste or a certain knowledge kind of worker layer, you get access to a certain level in the internet, or to certain groups and patterns and networks. And that's what's going to connect you in the end. It's nothing to do with your category in other ways. It's like, are you a player? Because I found in the semiconductor industry, and I assume it's in others, is talent is always rare. And to find people who have that aptitude or talent in your discipline, in your area, which can be very focused and specialized, is very rare. And, to not have geography be a limiting on that, is very interesting. A lot of things get shaken up, and you can see a lot of people moving out of cities in this last 2 years. So we'll see if they come back after. This year you're going to see a full recovery. I'm quite, I don't know why I'm confident about that, but I feel like that's the way the wind seems to be blowing. And I think Sri Lanka will take off again. It has that pre-Celtic tiger feel to it, where it has a lot of attractive qualities that the rest of the world haven't sort of figured out, or noticed till now. And I think we'll have millions of tourists very quickly here in the next 10 years. I think it'll go like Bali or something like that. So, the world is on steroids as far as change goes. And a lot of people who are struggling with that change or fighting it or arguing about it. But again, to come back to Buddhism is don't fight with nature, try to work with nature, not against it,
Another major positive that I see.
Know it well.
Yeah, sorry. Did I disrupt you there?
Well, just simply that wisdom is knowing things as they really are. That is the definition of wisdom, and we don't have a faculty of wisdom. We don't have a university of wisdom going on. And that ultimately is the difference you asked earlier on again. What distinguishes Buddhism from other traditions is that it is a complete wisdom tradition. It's focused on the methods. It has the practices. It has, frameworks and teachings and that. And, again, to my eye or experience or knowledge, they're not in argument with the way the world is in this present time, whereas a lot of other religions and ideas have fallen away because they are not meeting, they're not as things really are. They're stories, they're narratives, and you find all these teachers in those religions are saying, oh, it's just a metaphor and this is what it really means. No, well, that's not actually what it says there. But we can actually say this is what it actually says there, and these are our practices, and this is what it's all built around, just to a great degree. I mean, of course, you'll meet people who don't like some of the teachings where, that there's different realms and different kinds of beings and all this kind of thing. But anyway, that's a separate story.
Ciaran, this will be our last comment because we've come to the end of our time, our last discussion point. If that's all right.
Yeah. This is actually. I had a few different points. Actually, I'll continue with that thread and just and go with it because I think it kind of wraps things up. It relates to the woke thing, and it also relates to the concept you mentioned earlier on around error correction, and maybe it fits in with some components of Buddhist philosophy as well, or Buddhist teachings as well, more so than philosophy. But is that a major benefit that I see to the woke stuff is that it's forcing defense of the parts of the civilization that are worth keeping. And I think what those parts are actually the error correcting mechanisms that we have. Because the woke stuff comes from a place of dogmatic certainty about what the world is, with this primary lens of viewing the world as power relations between identity groups, power relations between identity characteristics, and the world is just power all the way down. And that it's like a twisted, dark version of Mark 2016 or whatever it is, which the last will be first and the first will be last, where it takes the person with the most amount of intersecting identity, oppressed identity characteristics, and put them as Christ to be held up on top of the podium or whatever. And it's that twisted version, except without the love, without the redemption, without the humility. It's got none of that stuff. It's got no forgiveness, no love, no compassion, no humility. So it's this like hollow, dark, twisted version of Christianity without any of the good stuff. But it's dogmatic, and it operates in binary, black and white, dogmatic shades of binary shades. But what it's forcing, just like you mentioned John Stuart Mill, like I might not know who John Stuart Mill was, or I might not have read On Liberty if it hadn't been for the woke stuff. So the major components of the West that I see are the most important components of the West are actually the hardest parts to defend, and they're the hardest parts to tangibly express, like an understanding of the philosophy of science and its error-correcting methodologies, the understanding of free speech, and essentially the fact that it's an error-correcting methodology, so we can correct each other's errors. The understanding of democracy, the understanding of the benefits of market forces as a way of almost in a sort of pseudo-evolutionary way or semi-evolutionary way, selecting for that which is best fitted to the environment. So it's like they're all error-correcting technologies that are under attack, and that's what the woke. So the woke uprising, let's say, or the woke dogma is actually forcing a widespread. It's forcing people to have this wider understanding of the importance of these foundational concepts, which are all based on error correction. So would you have any thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. In fact, I've taken all of that, those woke points, and I spent a long time listening to them. You know, I was going through a podcast from a guy that was all about intersectionality and, you know, the sort of gay trans perspective on stuff, simply to just like stimulate my own thinking and, you know, sort of shake off that slumber of, you know, taking the foundations for granted. And I sort of a clarifying, like, so, you know, I hope I've been able to express clearly some of the ideas that we've been discussing here. And that's thanks to that stimulus and provocation. Like I said, like when somebody is annoying, or, you know, when something lands with me a bit, like I don't just kind of go, oh, buzz off, you know, I'm like, no, that's very interesting. You know, so like a couple of years ago, like I had to go through this diversity and inclusion training, actually in a monastery in Perth. Like that would have been in 2017, fairly early on. And, you know, I mean, I still have that handbook. I mentioned it to you in a text once. I still have that handbook. And you know, I was being grilled, you know, trained on this is microaggression and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, in my own mind, I'm like going, you know, what's wrong with all of this? Like this, I don't have the words. I don't have the articulation. I don't have the ideas. Like, and I really had to go back to my 101 understanding of the world. And, you know, go back to, you know, class 1 of science, class 1 of philosophy.
Be frozen. You still there, Ciaran?
I'm still here, yeah.
Yeah, he might be frozen there. Sometimes to get some weather events there in Sri Lanka. So yeah, it's quite interesting there as he's trying to reconnect that even a Buddhist monk has to undergo diversity, inclusivity, and equity training.
Yeah.
Who would have thought? Huh?
but the paradox of that, to think that it's where so much of Buddhism seems to be, from my limited understanding, is coming to know your own mind, yeah, and coming to pay attention to the workings of the mind. Whereas to then be told that microaggressions are this bad thing you need to be really careful of, it's totally antithetical to what the teachings suggest. You know, that suffering is this shared reality to existence, to conscious existence, but then that you're told that you have to be careful of being offensive. It's like as part of the teachings in it. I had a load of other questions.
He's completely gone now. I think it might be in Power Outreach. We might have to invite him back on, because I've got lots of other questions as well, and I think it's a good conversation. But we've done over 2 hours now already.
That point.
Yeah, he just messaged me here, and he's just said he's got a Power Outreach, so he won't be able to reconnect. So we might just wrap up here.
The point that I think that was really useful as well, though, was that like that was a really interesting point that I really need to mull on, where he was talking about the Bufo experience and this concept of like hanging on to it. Whereas that's something that I really need to mull on, because there might be something to that by virtue of the fact that it made me uncomfortable as he was saying it. So like that in itself, just like he said, it's like, that's to me an indicator that there's something there that I need to explore. Like anything that makes me uncomfortable, to me, is an indicator that there's something there I need to dig at. I need to pluck away at.
I got the same thing today, Ciaran, out of conversation, the very same thing. When things make me uncomfortable, I need to embrace them. I actually, to be honest with you, I actually crossed over with your story, which is a bit like Dante's Inferno, which is go into hell. And for me, that is going into hell, is reading and listening to the things that I would say, that's a load of shit. I should actually embrace it and understand it. And I should put my head into it and go, okay, this is what's happening. And like what you were saying with your experience, I had some similar experiences recently in meditation. I actually messaged Buddharakkhita about it, and he said the same thing to me, just like let them go type of thing. There were comforting experiences. They were a bit sort of slightly nearly on the paranormal. They're very strange. And of course, I think there was part of me that wanted to feel special that I was having these, and I was some sort of adjacent to the norm, and I was privileged, or whatever the word you want to have. But in actual fact, it's just the mind playing tricks maybe at the time. You know, so it's not hanging on to it. And then for the next 2 or 3 days, meditation was like a slog. It was like I was going in with a cricket bat to my own head. I couldn't even sit still for 5 minutes, where I was doing like 40, 50 minutes before that. But then when I dropped all this kind of, oh, I'm feeling this and I'm feeling that, it was back like to minus step one. So that's interesting too. You just kind of constantly resetting.
But the thing in it though is the integration, because this is what I'd love to chat to him about further, because this is such a deep part of meditation. Like before I'd ever done psychedelics, it was in meditation experiences that I had anything that even approximated a psychedelic state would have been in meditation. But it's the concept of integration to help bring that, because from a psychedelic perspective and from let's say a peak experience perspective, just peak experience can be with psychedelics, can be altered states of some way. It can be ecstatic dancing at some concert. It can be all sorts of things. It's how does that alter the way? The best way I've ever heard it put might have been Jamie Wheel, and he said something like, how do these experiences alter how you behave on a rainy Tuesday in February? Which is exactly what today is, actually, isn't it? Today's Tuesday and today's February.
It is, yeah. But I tell you what, Karen, it's not. It is February, and I can tell you, it's far from fucking raining here in Western Australia.
Yeah, it's actually sunny outside the window here as well.
We've been blasted with 40 degrees every day lately.
Yeah, but it's actually sunny outside. It's a lovely day, but it's like that's what it is. It's how does the peak experience? So how does the altered state translate to altered trait?
Yeah.
That's it. And that's the integration process. So for example, a differentiation between Carl Jung was Carl Jung and Freud would interpret these, like say, these dream scenarios, but Freud was constantly about bringing it back to understand the trauma that led to it from your youth or whatever. So whereas Jung was about how do we understand what's going on such that we can figure out how to act as we move into the future.
Yeah.
So Freud was looking backwards. Jung was looking backwards to go forward.
Yeah.
So Jung was about how do we take lessons from this such that we learn how to better orient our actions to be in line with whatever information your unconscious mind is providing you with.
Which may also be an age thing, because like Buddharakkhita said, like there might be an age thing there as well. So, Freud might be, as he got older, be more retrospective and reactive and looking back, where Jung was younger, and he was looking more into the future. Yeah.
But I think it's a philosophical thing as well, because it's like if you're obviously it's even linguistic. It's like even earlier on when I was describing openness to the future, it's not even necessarily, the future is almost like thinking, because the future is an undisclosed, undefined time. It's just not happened yet. Whereas the future, like right now, was the future to 10 seconds ago when I started this sentence. So it's not necessarily an openness to the future. It's almost more, to be much more precisely, it's kind of like an openness to how things unfold.
Yeah.
More so to the future off in some distance. It's like an openness to unfolding, the openness to the unfolding of the present moment. It's that kind of a experiential state that's like an indicator of, to me, it's the kind of state that I'd like to be able to spend more time in, where it's not detached from reality. It's not nostalgically looking into the past and wishing for wishing the way things were. It's not looking into the future as if to say the future is going to be way better than what now is. It's just this contented, tranquil openness to the present unfolding moment.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful North Star.
I think that's a brilliant place to cut this conversation today. Our next conversations coming up are going to feature guests as well. So just if people are staying tuned, you may notice we haven't had regular episodes like every single week. That's due to a number of factors. One is we're really busy. Two is we got a lot of reading on as well. And three is we want to bring some more guests in as well. So there's a few different factors there. So next week we have Rachel Menzies, who has written a brilliant book which builds upon Ernest Becker's work and her management theory called Mortals. It was released in the second half of 2021 or around September, October. Just finished reading that book. Rachel has kindly agreed to come onto the podcast next week. She's based in Sydney. And then the following week, we have the very outspoken person on COVID, Rob Wolf, who's been on the Joe Rogan podcast a number of times. But Rob is a very educated man in the sciences, but also does jiu-jitsu and throws around a few weights, and has worked with a lot of fighters, and very practical but very academic and very, very skilled. Probably as Buddharakkhita was saying, like, you don't have to get a PhD to do these things, and Rob's probably one of those type of people. He's very, very clever in this regard, but he's very outspoken on COVID and health and public health. So Rob will be coming on to talk to us about that. He'll be joining us from the USA. So they're the next two episodes.
What's interesting about him is that he's not outspoken in a way that's ungrounded or.
Oh, it's all grounded in science and facts.
And it's not conspiratorial. It's not like how would you put it? It's not like the conspirituality kind of outspokenness. It's and it's not. It's very much. It's a lot of it's along the reason that we had him is that I had listened to some podcasts of his, and based on I wrote this essay, "COVID is over, Gollum must let it go," I think was the name of the title, and in it, I kind of looked at this convergence between some of these notions of the kind of like some of the real COVID hysteria stuff about, mask 5-year-olds, and then you need to also wear a mask and sanitize your hands while you've had 4 boosters and you have socially distanced sex. That's that kind of COVID hysteria, that kind of thing, and watching how that kind of hysteric COVID ideology, treating as if it was the only problem, that needs to be it's kind of like Zoom class hysteria converging with some of the same people sometimes, and the same kind of underlying safetyist philosophies that were emerging with some like hardcore militant vegan climate change, zero carbon people, just like the zero COVID. And also, just this kind of convergence. So I'm not articulating it very well, even though I wrote this essay and I mentioned it because my brain is scattershot at the moment. But basically, Rob is a really interesting thinker across a load of domains, as you put it. So he's going to be interesting to just probe about the workings of the world at the moment, because I think he's got such a broad view on the world across so many different domains, economically, politically, scientifically, educationally, health-wise, but then he's also such a grounded person because of his physical pursuits, I'd imagine, are contributing, with jiu-jitsu, and also, he seems to have a nice situation in terms of grounding in nature and a nice family situation. He's just an interesting character to be kind of just asking about the world as it's currently unfolding and what's going on, because I think he has the kind of views that I find very thought-provoking, and I'm looking forward to chatting to him big time. And Rachel Menzies, because it'd be interesting to go back into some of the terror management theory stuff and how she thinks that it may have played a role in the last couple of years in particular, because it's been such an intense couple of years with constant death reminders all the time, with death rates and various degrees of the use of fear to for certain political agendas in both from all directions, not just pro-COVID, but also from people who are, sorry, not pro-COVID, but on the COVID hysteria extreme, and also on the anti-COVID and the anti-COVID is extreme, which, like the whole don't ever get vaccinated because it's Bill Gates nanobots and 5G towers are going to control you because of injected all this kind of shit. It's like, it's all just the use of fear they're all just, terror management theory, I think, is a really useful lens to describe a lot of the extremes and the patterns that are unfolding
on both sides. Yeah. Excellent. All right, Ciaran. Thank you very much for this evening and your morning, and we'll reconvene next week to talk to Rachel. If you're liking the podcast, please hit the subscribe button there on YouTube or in your feed. And if you think that somebody would like it, please forward it on to them. We want to get these good conversations out to many more people. And if you have any ideas for us to discuss or any topics you'd like us to dig in, please send them our way, because whilst we have a long list, we're always very interested in hearing what you would like us to discuss. All right, with that, we'll finish off. Thanks, Ciaran, and I'll talk to you next week.
Peace, man. Much love.
All right, take it easy.